It's variety.
Hello, my name is Adam Sternberg, and welcome to the Variety Podcast. Today's guest is a world-renowned silhouette artist. He's cut over 300,000 silhouettes, including the late Queen Elizabeth II 3 times. Actually, while we're on Queen Elizabeth II 3 times, if you're cutting someone of that magnitude, do you get nervous?
Yes, I do, Adam. I get very nervous.
And your hands shake, which can't...
Yes, the first time I did Queen Elizabeth's silhouette was it was called the Golden Jubilee Rout. You know, it was a long time ago when we had a Golden Jubilee of the Queen, and they had a big party at the end of the year at the Ritz Hotel in London to celebrate, and I was booked there. And I was told firmly at the beginning of the evening, you must do the Queen's silhouette. You know, I wasn't allowed to wimp out and just not approach her. But my hands were shaking, and it was actually quite difficult to approach her because everyone wanted naturally to speak to the Queen. And so she had this big
entourage.
There was always people kind of, you know, you could see that some people were speaking to her and some people were sort of waiting their turn.
So how did you know when the right moment was?
And essentially I just had to go in and interrupt, you know, when she was talking to somebody.
You interrupted the
Queen? I interrupted the conversation she was having with somebody and said, you know, good evening, did my usual spiel. Good evening, nice to see you. I'm the artist, I'm here to cut portraits. And the gentleman she was speaking to, whose name I don't know, immediately said, oh, you must do, you know, Your Majesty, you must have a silhouette done. And she posed. But it was very interesting because we were told at the beginning of the evening that the Queen knew she was going to have her silhouette done. She knew there was a magician going around, and she didn't like to be taken by surprise. So she knew these things were going to happen, and therefore at some point I had to go and do her silhouette, and that meant, you know, I had the courage to approach her.
Well, that's good, because you would have thought there'd be, you know, an allocated time slot for Her Majesty.
There wasn't. No, in fact, because of the nature of the party, it was meant to be quite informal. It wasn't.
Do you remember where was it?
It was at the Ritz Hotel in London.
Yeah. I know it well. I think I've got ahead of myself because I'm not sure I quite introduced you. Anyway,
that's all right.
I got too excited by Queen Elizabeth. In fact, I think you're probably one of the only acts that I know who's done the Queen. So done silhouette. Well, the only act who's done the silhouette. Anyway, you are Charles Burns, and the silhouette artist.
That's correct, yes.
It's lovely to meet you, to see you on the podcast. Let's start at the beginning, if you don't mind. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in the West Country, in Somerset. My parents sent me to a boarding school in Yorkshire.
Long way from Somerset.
Long way from, yes.
Well, they weren't telling you something, were they?
I come from a traditional Catholic family, and Aberforth was the same school my father went to. And I have uncles who were in the monastery there, and so there's a lot of family connections to the school. I absolutely hated it. They have a good choir there. It was a complete nightmare. They do have a good choir. I wasn't part of it. Singing is not one of my skills. But for me, the art room, and especially a very quirky and interesting art teacher called John Bunting, who was a sculptor, became a kind of refuge for me, and it became the place that I felt safe. And so I spent as much time as I could in the art room, learning to drawing busts and figures and things like that, and I very quickly realised that drawing, and to some extent painting, but especially drawing, was the thing that most fascinated me.
So how old were you at that point?
I went there when I was 12, when I went to the junior house, and then I was there all through sort of GCSEs and left when I was 18.
18?
Yeah. So quite formative years.
And it is interesting, isn't it, how important, I mean, often people say there's a teacher can be in influencing your life, and to be lucky enough to have someone who's sort of supportive at a time which is important, particularly if you're in a boarding school where maybe you don't feel that comfortable.
The school was a nightmare as far as I was concerned. I mean, it was a very, very big emphasis on sports, which I really hated it. There was a lot of bullying, which I was subject to. And it was, so the art room was like a sort of bubble. That was the one space where I felt I was okay to be myself.
And then after Ampleforth?
After Ampleforth, I went to art college. I originally went to Exeter to do a foundation course. Okay. And then I spent some time in France at the École des Beaux-Arts in Lyon. And I went and did a degree at Wolverhampton Art College in the Midlands. All of which I loved, and for me, art college was a time when I sort of came out of myself and was able to repair some of the emotional damage which was done to me at school. So.
And do you think art itself is a bit of a therapy, I suppose?
It can be, yes. And
I mean, obviously people use art as therapy, don't they?
There is a way to use art as therapy. I think art for me is about communication. It's about trying to say something to an audience. And art therapy is slightly different because it's more about, expressing something that happens in yourself, and the audience is less important.
So I suppose that was another question I had, is whether you perceived yourself as an artist or a performer.
Yeah, very interesting question. And to be honest, I think it's quite hard to disentangle those two things, because I think all artists are to some extent performers, especially artists who are trying to make a career out of art. There is always a performative element to art. And also you could equally argue that all performers are to some extent artists. There's an art to what they do. But I think in my own case, I exist right on the cusp between those two things, in that I'm literally performing my art in front of an audience when I'm working at an event, which is something I do a lot, and with a silhouette, which is made using a pair of scissors and a piece of paper, which is what I specialize in.
It's very minimal, isn't it? And that's part of the magic. It's like not a huge easel with loads of different oils and sort of
It's true,
it's
yes.
It's just that.
It's true. I always say I can make a living with a pair of scissors and a pocket full of paper.
Wish I could.
And that is literally what I do. So I walk into an event. I usually have a long jacket with pockets sewn in, which has, various size bits of black paper and card in it. And then I walk up to a group of people, approach them, explain what I do, ask for a volunteer, and cut out their silhouette. The process takes minutes, and I try and make it fun and entertaining to watch.
So can we just go back a bit, though?
Yeah.
So you left school, you went to these colleges.
Yeah.
Work-wise, were you doing anything proper at any point?
No, well, I did the odd bar job when I was a student to supplement my income, but no, not really.
You're never going to be an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor or...
My experience at Aberforth taught me that I was not suited to that kind of environment. And I think when I was at art college, I experienced a kind of freedom in that art students are all quirky, individual, odd people, as am I. And I think it was the way I described it at the time was that I was one of nature's natural self-employed people. I was literally incapable of working in a company or an office, because I felt that going into an office environment would be a bit like going back to school, and I would be exposed again to
bullying,
to bullying, to the pressure, and the thought of office politics. I just knew that I was somehow constitutionally incapable of dealing with that.
So you said you're quirky, different. What do you sort of mean by that?
Well, later in life, when I was 40, I had a family, and my son was diagnosed with a condition which at that time was described as Asperger's syndrome. Now just talked as part of the autism spectrum disorder. Yeah. And I knew, as soon as he was diagnosed, I knew that I probably had the same condition, because the problems he was experiencing at school so exactly mirrored the problems that I had experienced 30 years previously when I was at primary school and later at Aberforth. And so I went to see a GP who referred me to a specialist in autism, and they did a lot of tests and talked to me about my childhood and talked to people who knew me as I was growing up. And also I was then diagnosed with the same condition, with Asperger's syndrome.
Was that like a relief, sort of an understanding?
Yes, I would describe it as one of the most empowering moments of my life. And the reason I found it empowering was because it kind of meant that all the internal habits that I'd formed in terms of always feeling that I had to rehearse every conversation, always over-preparing for every situation that I walk into, were in fact the right thing to do. Whereas previous to that, I'd sort of beaten myself up a bit about it, thinking, well, why do I have to prepare to such an absurd level for every eventuality when other people just seem to be able to just naturally operate, where I never really felt I had that
See, I'm the opposite. I don't probably
prepare.
Probably don't prepare quite enough. So you didn't start off though as a silhouette artist in terms of earning money through art, did you?
No, I didn't.
In fact, hold on. I think we have a picture here of you early doors. So how old do you think you were then?
I would have been in my mid-20s, maybe late 20s.
And that's Covent Garden, isn't it?
And that's in Covent Garden at the Jubilee Market, where I worked for every weekend there for over 10 years.
And this was prior to you doing silhouettes?
This is prior to my doing silhouettes. Well, that's actually where I started doing silhouettes. But I started out there in the late 1980s. After I left art college, I worked there as a street portrait artist. So as you can see in this picture, I was drawing portraits for people, and I had a sort of A-frame stand with some samples of my work, and I was selling portraits for £10 or £12 a time. Each portrait took 15 minutes, something like that.
And you could earn a living doing it?
And I could earn a good living, yes, as long as the weather was all right.
That does look sunny, doesn't it? You've got your hat on.
I've got the hat on.
And you've got some shadows of, sun, definitely.
In fact, I've even put up the red sunshade in the top right corner, which was necessary that I wouldn't be blinded by the glare from the white paper.
And at the same time you were doing the portraits, you started doing...
I hadn't started doing silhouettes when that photograph was taken, but later on, one summer I was working there, and a Spanish artist came to Covent Garden. He was only there a few months, but he was cutting silhouettes, and I'd never seen silhouette cutting done before. And he was a very interesting character, and I used to go and watch him work. And he would say, after a while, he'd say, "Come on, Charles, this isn't working. Let's go and have a drink." And he'd go to a...
drink. There's another artist encouraging...
He'd go to a cafe and he'd order a bottle of red wine, and I'd drink a glass of it, and he'd drink the rest of it. and he would say, "Oh, these English, they don't understand my art. They can't, it's not working. I have to go back to Spain." And I had the feeling, looking at him, I thought, well, the reason they're not understanding your art is because actually the silhouettes aren't that good. I knew immediately.
Nothing to do with the fact you were Spanish.
I knew immediately watching him that I could do a better job than that, even though I'd never tried to cut a silhouette.
But how? I mean, you might well be artistic and can do but that's quite a specific skill, isn't it?
Well, it is, but drawing is at the heart of it, and I think, and I would say this to any artist, that drawing is the heart of all art. If you can draw, then you can learn to paint, you can learn to do murals, you can learn to cut silhouettes, you can learn. Everything is based on drawing.
Can I ask you actually a quick question? Sometimes people say to me, "I can't sing," and I say, "Everyone can sing. You just need to." Do you think everyone can draw?
Yes, I do. Yes.
So my drawing so I was absolutely the opposite of you. So the lesson I feared the most was the art class, because I was absolutely rubbish at it. And in fact, I used to get jobs like clearing up because I was so rubbish at art. But you think, even me, anyone?
I think if you spoke to a singer, and I have talked to singers about this, they will tell you that the reason that people grow up afraid of singing is because they were badly taught at school, and therefore they had a bad experience which put them off. And the same is true of art. The reason you were frightened of the art class is because you were badly taught, and you had an experience which made you think you were constantly being judged, and that your
well, I was.
Well, exactly
in a negative way.
But you shouldn't be. You shouldn't be judged. You should never judge children for the work they make. Children naturally pick up a pencil or a crayon and they make marks on things.
Yes.
Which is basically what drawing is, and all children do that. But as they grow up, they get the feeling that somehow they can't do it because other children are doing it better than they are, and therefore it's not for them. That's a real shame. Actually.
No, that is a shame. But I suppose you didn't like sport.
No,
I suppose sport isn't something that everyone necessarily, unless there might be a sport, swimming or something.
Yeah.
But you're saying that art, potentially everyone can do. And actually what I did learn is that there's one thing between being, technically excellent at drawing, which is a skill, but you can still have an artistic vision which doesn't need that level of artistic skill. You could create an installation, for example. Maybe you don't think that's art.
Well, of course it's art. I'm very flexible in what I view as art.
We won't get on to that definition of art. I think that's a whole new podcast, probably.
It's certainly true that not everyone can be an artist in the sense of earning a living from art. That would be absurd. But the idea that people can't draw is also wrong. Everyone can draw to some extent.
Yes.
Everyone can draw just to show people what they're thinking as a way of communication.
But could you be taught, say, to draw a face, for example?
Yes, you can. Yes, definitely. My art teacher at school used to say that art is 90% hard work and 10% skill
Which is,
or
I presume,
talent.
the same with most things.
I think yes, I think it is. Yes, but in order to put in the hard work, you need to have the motivation and also the enjoyment of the subject. And so if you've had a bad experience and you hate doing it, then you're not going to put in the hard work, and your drawing is never going to develop. And I think that's the same for any skill.
So from that age, your early 20s to now, you've constantly made your living
as an artist. I'm one of the few artists I know from my year in art college who've made a living as an artist from the day they left art college.
And you've never regretted it?
Never regretted it, no. Always enjoyed it, still love it. Never want to stop, to be honest.
And that's great. I think for all of us in our lives, it's passion, which is everything. If you are passionate about something and enjoy it, it's a bit of a cliche, but it's not work, is it? It is work, but and I'm sure there's always downsides.
No, it is a cliche, but I'm very happy to admit that I've never worked a day in my life.
So you cut all sorts of people. We mentioned the Queen, you've done Nelson Mandela and President Clinton and lots of others. Is there a particular type of person or look that's harder than others to do silhouettes of?
Not really, no. And I think part of the challenge, making a silhouette is basically like making a portrait, and I think as an artist, I would want to think that I can make a portrait of anybody. There are some situations which are harder than others. For instance, obviously, young children that don't sit still even for a second are going to be harder to make a portrait of than someone who's better behaved. Lighting at events can be a problem. If you can't see what you're doing, if I can't see what I'm doing, then there's not much I can do. But there are some people, and this sounds rather strange, but there are some people who don't look like themselves in profile. It's a very odd phenomenon, but when you look at them face to face, they look like one person, and they turn in profile, and it's someone completely different.
But also, some people don't look like themselves in a mirror, because that's
true.
That's a mirrored reflection, isn't it? And if you don't have a symmetry, then you look slightly different.
Yes, I don't know what it is, but there are some people when I'm cutting their silhouette, and I think I've done a really good job, and it looks just like them, and I hold it up, and they turn to look at me, and it's just a completely different person looking at me.
So what happens? Do you get occasions where you do a silhouette, you give it to the person, and they go, no, that doesn't really look like me?
Yeah, I'm usually rescued by the audience.
Are you?
Who all go, yes, it does. Because the other thing that happens is that people's own self-image is often not accurate. I mean, we literally don't know what we look like in profile.
What you do is accurate. I mean, it's as opposed to a caricature artist, for example, who does a caricature. And there you do get people sometimes quite upset, because a caricature, depending on the style, can make people look grotesque, or their features bigger than they are, or smaller, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because what you do, yes, as you say, is a portrait.
Is this a good moment to actually do a silhouette?
Yes, why don't you try one? Of me?
Of you, yes. I've got some paper here, and I've got a pair of scissors.
Good.
So, Adam, I'm going to need you in profile. Obviously, you need to be sort of position yourself so that you can still... Yeah, that's the right angle. Yes, hold that angle.
I'm at the right angle, which is rare for me, to be honest.
That's great. Now, you've immediately set me a problem, because normally for a right-handed artist, as I am, it's usually easier to cut the right profile, and you're presenting me with your left profile.
I did that deliberately to make things
which
hard.
essentially means I've got to cut backwards, which is fine, because I'm very happy to cut backwards.
Now, remember, for all those people who are not viewing this on YouTube, you need to describe what you're doing so people just listening can get
Fantastic. So essentially, I've picked up a very small piece of paper, which is black with a white piece of paper on top. And the white piece of paper helps me to see what I'm doing. And what I do to cut a silhouette, as much as possible, I cut in one line. So I started at the front, at Adam's chest, and then I cut up towards his chin, and then around the nose and around the spectacles. And now I'm up onto the hair. And as I go around the hair, because the scissors always have to point away from me, rather than keeping the paper still, I'm rotating the paper in my left hand.
So do you take the scissors out of the cut? Is it
Not
one cut?
As much as possible, I try and do it in one line. So sometimes if I have to go back and recut a piece, I will remove the scissors and reinsert them.
Am I able to talk?
You are able to talk. It's fine.
That's lucky,
yes. No.
That's lucky. Oops. I was thinking about, what about like women with women or anyone with complicated hair? styles?
Oh, great. I love all that kind of stuff. The more complicated, the better, as far as I'm concerned. It takes longer, but that doesn't matter. You're done, by the way, Adam.
Oh.
You can relax.
Oh, good.
I'm going to put it on a card for you, and I'll hold it first to a camera, and then I'm going to pass that along, and you can show it to
I'm
a
going to show
different
this camera. There we go. That's me.
right, yes.
And what's amazing is how quickly you do this.
Yeah. And that was quite slow, actually, because I was slowing down in order to be able to talk while cutting. I can cut a lot faster than that. And when I'm working at events, typically the first half a dozen silhouettes I do are at about that speed. And then gradually, as I warm up, I get faster and faster. Yeah.
Amazing.
Thank you.
So when you're cutting, like you cut me, is there ever a time whilst you're cutting you think, oops,
Yes.
I made a mistake there?
Frequently, yes.
And then what happens? Do you have to start again, or can you remedy it?
Sometimes I can remedy it. Sometimes if a silhouette is going wrong, it goes wrong within the first 10 seconds. And so I often just take out the scissors and move back half a centimetre and cut another line behind the first line, which is more accurate than the first one was. It's very rare that I'll throw one away and start again. It happens a few times a year, but very, very rarely. Quite often, if the silhouette is more advanced than that, then I will just carry on with the silhouette. And, it sounds awful, but there's a certain, because of the entertainment value of what I do, it's almost inevitable that some silhouettes will be better than others.
Yes, no, absolutely.
And so you just have to accept sometimes they're not as good as they might be.
I always argue that the joy of entertainment and art, in a way, is the lack of perfection, or the potential lack of perfection. I think we live in a society these days where so much is about everything being absolutely perfect. So, AI and everything that computers can generate, which is absolutely spot on. But our humanity doesn't, and this is getting a little bit deep, but doesn't our humanity lie in errors?
Yeah, it's a very interesting idea. And I like that as a way of looking at it. It's certainly true that working as I do as an entertainer, the value of the silhouettes lies not so much in the cuttings themselves, but in the effect it has on the event. So, for instance, you'll see people walking around the event holding the silhouettes and saying, "Look what I had done," and that creates a way for people to get together. And there's also the value in just people watching what I do, because working with hands with paper and scissors is quite different than watching someone draw on a board or a piece of paper. People understand what drawing is, even if they're not very good at it themselves. But very few people really understand what I'm doing with scissors and paper. So they get fascinated by the process.
The process and the way you do it and the way you talk about it. So the whole thing, going back to what you're saying, becomes a show.
Yes, exactly.
As well as the end result, which is a piece of art. You have the making of it, which is...
So in some ways, the silhouette becomes like a memory of the show. There's a lot of things magicians talk about, and I've worked with a lot of magicians, and they always say that when they've done a magic trick, the real value of the trick comes in the retelling. The trick may be quite modest and quite easy to figure out, but then someone goes and tell it, and someone else tells it, and when they tell the story of the magic trick, somehow it becomes embellished. It becomes more magical and becomes more amazing and impossible than it was when the trick was actually performed. And I think there's something about, I've heard people say, he took a pair of scissors and he cut it out in like 5 seconds. And I'm thinking, no, I didn't. It was at least 90 seconds.
Who are you to disagree?
Exactly, but I just smile and keep quiet, because in some ways they're embellishing what I do and making it more amazing than it really is. And that is where the entertainment value happens. Is where when people start talking about what I do, then I know that what I'm doing is working for the event. And that, to me, is actually more important than the artworks that people take away with them.
Most of the people that I'm interviewing on this podcast, I think you're right. Entertainment is not just about the moment that you experience it, whether you see the magician's trick or whether you see the circus performer's aerial act. It's the memory of it and the experience and the retelling it, but also the emotional impact it has on you. And that's part of the memory. It's the emotional impact, the wow, you know what I mean? Or the fear or the tears or whatever the emotion might be from the performance. And I think that's really important. And it's what makes entertainment so engaging. And I've always thought that, a tightrope walker, if you take a tightrope walker and have him walk across sort of suspended thing and big fall. It's not the same act as if there's a thing to catch them, a net, because it's the possibility that things can go wrong. So people might think, I mean, you describe how you can always remedy things going wrong, but people in their head possibly think this can go wrong. The trick from a magician can go wrong. So it's going back to what I was saying, that it's that thing that is not necessarily perfect, which makes it so magical.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yes. These silhouettes can and do go wrong.
Yes, but I think all these things, the people that I talk to, things can go wrong. I mean, hopefully they don't. And hopefully, as you said, everyone has ways of negotiating themselves out of it. But, most lines of work, everything's very methodical.
Yes.
Going wrong is not part and parcel of the experience, actually. Whereas I would always argue it is part and parcel of artistic. Yeah. It is. That's what makes it so interesting. Going back, actually, to AI, do you view that as a sort of a threat?
Oh, I'm fascinated by AI.
Are you?
Absolutely fascinated. I mean, I would describe silhouettes as being this very odd subject because it's such a niche subject, and yet it's taken me in all kinds of different directions. So through silhouettes, I've learned to, we made a film. I've learned to write books. I've become a better writer. The film was Silhouette Secrets, which is a documentary film we made a few years ago.
So you made it
I made it together with a filmmaker, friend of mine, and we did some crowdfunding and raised a bit of seed money, and we made this hour-long documentary about the history and art of silhouettes. And a lot of things went wrong in that, by the way. But we managed to hide them.
Where can you see that?
You can see that on my website
okay.
and on YouTube and places like that. So it's easy to find if you search for Silhouette Secrets. All these different skills and different avenues of life have come to me because of silhouettes. So I think of silhouettes as being this kind of, like a sort of secret thing, which takes me in all kinds of different directions, and I've learned about the history of them and things like that. I've rather lost the thread. How did I come to this? Oh, AI, that's right. And so,
see, if you were AI, you would never lose a thread, you see.
And so
you would be the thread, actually. Sorry.
And so, of course, where as soon as AI came, the first thing I did was to get onto ChatGPT and ask it if it could make a silhouette, and it can, and it's very interesting. And if you describe to ChatGPT what kind of silhouette you want, for instance. I uploaded a photograph of a young girl in profile and asked it to make a silhouette in the manner of the famous 18th century silhouettist John Mayers. And it sort of did. And what was interesting about it was that it hadn't just taken the photograph and made it black. And exactly, it had actually redrawn the outline of the person as I would with a pair of scissors.
But it was on a screen.
It was on screen, of course. So, it wasn't actually cut out of paper. That AI can't do.
But I presume it could be, at some point in the future, it could be cut out using, I don't know, a laser or something.
Well, not in the future. It could be done now. You could easily take that image and cut it out with a laser cutter. That would be no problem at all. And so it is possible to conceive of an AI doing what I do. You'd have to, I've even thought about how could I make this work, because if anyone's going to do it, I would like to be the one who does it.
Fair enough.
But actually, it's quite complicated.
But hold on, if you are one of the leading exponents of silhouettes, then you must be in the AI model. They must have used your knowledge somewhere.
Quite possibly.
Yeah, well, exactly. Who else are they going to be using?
Quite possibly I am, yes. But to actually do that, for people, you'd need a camera, you'd need some kind of program, you'd need a way, and then you'd need a printer.
Yeah, but you could
have
a...
It's going to take ages.
Yeah, but you could have a robot, couldn't you?
Yes, you could. And literally walking around at events, with a camera in their eyes and a...
My name's Charles Burns.
And a laser cutter, and out comes a silhouette.
This could extend your life beyond your life.
Tell you what, there's something this is something we talked about in Silhouette Secrets. In the 18th century, there was an automaton who worked on the Strand in London. Automaton is like a figure,
yes.
A model figure that does things by itself,
yes.
Automatically.
Yes.
And automatons were very popular. And someone created an automaton that could make your silhouette. And so the automaton was a small figure, about 2 or 3 feet high, dressed like a Spanish artist, very flamboyantly. And it had a tablet in front of it and a stylus. And people would come and stand in front of it, and someone would press the button or whatever you did, wind it up to make it work. And it would click and whir and move, and it would draw an outline, or apparently draw an outline on the tablet, on a piece of paper, and then the operator would take the card away and give the person the silhouette. Of course, it was a trick. Nothing like that was happening. If you think about it, that would be technologically completely impossible.
So how did it work?
But it worked. There was a young man underneath the table where the automaton was sat with a pair of scissors peering out through a hole in the cloth, cutting out their silhouette. And somehow the operator would switch the two, like a magician would, and give them. And it was a great thing. But the point is, there's nothing new. Essentially,
there is nothing
what
new.
we're describing is what they already did on the 18th century.
Yeah, but this time you wouldn't need the little man inside it, would you?
You wouldn't need the little man, no.
But it is a challenge, isn't it, potentially, AI?
Not for me. I'm not in the least worried about it, partly because I feel I'm probably, at this stage in my life, it's not going to take away. It's not going to take away my living.
That's what I feel. I think we've been lucky there, because I think we've lived during an era where it's, been very needed, and there was been no alternative.
But the other point is that entertainment is essentially a human activity, and you need human beings to provide entertainment. And part of the entertainment value of what I do comes about precisely because it's so low tech. Precisely because all I need is a pair of scissors and a piece of paper.
And the other thing is, you can't be lying. I mean, it's going back to what we discussed about tricks. You can't possibly be tricking anyone, because they see the scissors, they see the paper, and they see the end result. So much these days can be sort of a myriad of sort of technology confusing things. Who knows what's true, what isn't true? And I think there is. You're right. There's a reassurance in knowing that actually this is a real thing with a real person. And that's why I think actually now, because there's so much in this world broadcast that you don't know whether it's true or not, to be with someone, physical, personal interactions is even more important, because it's the only way, by looking someone in the eye, that you know whether potentially they're telling the truth or not.
When I'm working at events, and I have this experience quite often, people go around showing other people their silhouettes, and people go, "Oh, that looks great. Where can I get one done?" And so they get directed over towards me, and they're sort of looking for the equipment. They assume on first meeting me that I'm like the camera operator. I'm not really the
doing
artist.
It personally.
And I say, yes, of course I can do your silhouette. Stand there, look that way, and I begin to cut their silhouette. And there's a moment where they do a double take, and they go, "What? You're just cutting it with scissors." And suddenly, their estimation of me has gone up 100-fold, because I'm no longer the person operating the equipment. I'm an artist doing something with a pair of scissors. And that suddenly makes the silhouette much more valuable in their eyes than if it was produced by some kind of machinery.
But that's sort of the technical dexterity, isn't it? It's using your hands, and it's like being a woodcarver or something like that, where you just appreciate the beauty of a person just doing this. And that's the other thing, I think, that's the people I talk to, you, Circus, they all do amazing things that the average person definitely can't do. But they are just people like me. Yeah. So it shows what people, it's like watching an athlete or a pole vaulter. I can never do that, but as a person, it's amazing. But what real people can actually do, the skills they have, I think it's amazing. So would you say, in all due modesty, within the UK, you are the most well-known silhouette artist?
Possibly. People say I am. I always struggle with that question, because I feel you really needs to come from somebody else.
Okay, well, put it this way.
Yes.
I think you are.
Thank you.
If you go beyond the UK, though, is this a thing?
It is a thing. I know a lot of silhouette artists around the world, and there are many more silhouette artists working in America than there are in the UK. In the UK, there's really just half a dozen or so, and you probably know them all.
Yeah.
In America, I'm in touch with 20 or 30 artists, and I think there are more that I'm not in touch with. And I think, and the reason for that is because of Disneyland. Walt Disney was a huge fan of silhouettes.
Oh God, I hadn't thought of that. That's interesting.
And he insisted, when they opened the first Disneyland in Los Angeles, that there should be a silhouette studio on Main Street, Disneyland.
Because I suppose that is almost a silhouette, isn't it? That iconic Disney image.
The Disney image,
yes.
is in a way, yes. And if you look at very old Mickey Mouse cartoons, when the cat chases the mouse past the fireplace, you'll often see a pair of silhouettes mounted either side of it. Just flashes past the screen, just like
That's
that.
Fascinating.
And so he felt that they were as symbolic of the sort of old colonial America and that sort of period, which of course they are. And for that, and a lot of artists have gone into Disneyland and been taught to cut silhouettes. And after 10 or 15 years, they get fed up at Disneyland and they go off and they start their own business as silhouette artists, and who can blame them? But for that reason, there are many more silhouette artists. But the ones in America, they tend to have a very, what I call the American style, which is, is slightly, to English eyes, looks slightly nostalgic and, slightly Disneyfied. In fact, they have very long eyelashes and
so
more lots of curly
more
hair.
like caricatures almost.
Not really like caricatures, but certainly more stylized than the way I cut. Whereas I tend to go for kind of ruthless realism as much as I can. And compared to the American school, my art it looks quite choppy and quite rough sometimes. But what I'm looking for is the sort of essence of the person. Whereas sometimes
the essence, yes.
Because to me, a silhouette is like a portrait. Ideally, I want to capture a physical likeness, but ideally, I want to go a bit beyond that and say something about who the person is, and that's the challenge that any portrait artist faces, and silhouettes are the same in that way. Whereas sometimes I feel there are artists who are content just with the physical likeness, if that sense, and maybe even embellishing that and making people look a bit better than they really are, flattering them a little bit. They're not so interested in getting to the essence of the human being inside.
Which I suppose, again, without getting too profound, is the essence of art, isn't it?
It's the essence of art, and because as I said at the beginning, art is about communication. And so when you show someone a portrait of themselves, you're trying to reflect back something of who that person is from my perspective or from my experience. And it's that aspect of trying to capture the essence of a person, which to me is the most fascinating thing about the art. And that's the thing that keeps me hooked on it. And that's the thing that keeps me endlessly fascinated and always wanting and always enthusiastic about going to the next event, is because I can continue that exploration of how to find the essence of a person. Which is always elusive, always difficult.
Do you think there's something almost psychological then about cutting, that you're somehow distilling not just a look of a person, but as you say, their essence? Do you ever get a vibe, I don't know, that someone's evil or some sort of,
No, I don't.
You don't? or you get a bad vibe.
I've been very lucky in life. I've never met an evil person. I don't know how many there are really out there.
Well, that's true.
I think people are all intrinsically very good, nice people. I know people make mistakes and people do bad things, but I've never met someone that I could really describe as evil. Maybe I've just been lucky. I don't know.
Maybe you have. Well, maybe no one is intrinsically evil. Maybe this is.
But certainly when I do portraits of people or silhouettes of people, I never get that feeling from anybody.
Maybe by definition, the type of people who are up for having theirs done are not that. Maybe they are good. Maybe they're willing. Possibly,
yes. Maybe there's a sort of selective process going on. So anyone who's willing to pose for a silhouette,
or incredibly narcissistic. It's sort of,
there are a lot of people who are not willing to have silhouettes done, which is interesting. And I always have to warn clients about that, because especially clients are saying, "Oh, you will do everybody."
Yes,
and I have to say, well, actually, there will be some people who don't want it.
And it's the same with magic. So some people don't like having magic tricks done to them or participating in particularly. And actually, magicians always tell me that how people react to magic tells you more about them than the magic.
I think that's true. And I would say the same, actually, the way people react to silhouettes. And also silhouettes have, for some people, because they're black and, they have a slightly sinister aspect to them. The idea of a shadow portrait, it's almost like seeing a death mask or something like that. There's this sort of association with with blackness and
death
and slightly sinister feeling about them. And some people, for that reason, are actually frightened of them. It's not a view I understand myself, but it's certainly the case that some people feel that way.
So, Charles, I just have one other question, what advice would you give to anyone who'd like to become an artist?
Oh, wow. It's a very difficult one. I think probably the first advice would be don't.
I think that's what everyone says. Yeah.
I suppose the serious side to that is that anyone who really wants to become an artist will become an artist anyway, no matter how many people tell them don't. And if they're put off by that, and if they take my advice seriously, they're probably not cut out to be an artist. I have an enormous amount of respect for anyone who can earn a living as an artist, partly because I know just how difficult that is. In my case, it almost felt like I had no choice.
You had no option, did you?
Other than to earn a living as an artist, and that's why I was able to do it. But there are many easier ways to earn a living. And I think for people, most people, if you look on social media, and you look a lot of people posting their artwork online, most of them are amateur artists. And there's nothing wrong with being an amateur artist. I mean, for anyone who wants to, enjoy themselves and make a little money on the side by selling the occasional artworks, but basically just impress their friends, then of course that's fantastic. But to actually earn a living and support a family through art is really, really hard. And some people can manage it. But I suppose the answer is you have to be obsessed with the art. And as I said before, you really have to be able to draw. So the first thing, when people say, how can I learn to cut silhouettes? Which is a slightly different question, I know. But the first thing I always say,
you have to draw.
Learn to draw. And if you can learn to draw, then perhaps you can learn to cut silhouettes, because drawing is the fundamental of all art. So that's the advantage. That's the advice.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks very much. That's what I always say to people when they ask me, should I be a singer? I say, or anything, no. And actually, if you wanted enough,
it's not going to put anyone off.
Because from what you're saying, you had no option. That is what you had to do.
Yeah.
It was your world.
And still is.
Yeah. But there are performers for whom it isn't their world, who have enough. I mean, I know a circus actor who ended up becoming a corporate lawyer, for example.
Yeah, people do leave it. It's true.
People do leave it. Particularly after COVID. A lot of
Yeah.
people left it because it was just,
Yeah.
it was too much.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you have to earn a living. And now you're in a very good situation because your brand, your name is as you are the name.
Yes, I'm fortunate that I can elevate my fees a little bit, and people don't mind because they want.
And also, there is something special
particular
about silhouettes. There are lots and lots of caricature artists, as you know, out there. Some are better than others, but there are very few silhouette artists, and there's something, as you said, special about a silhouette. It's not. It's different to a portrait or a caricature. It's
silhouette. I mean, I do a lot of weddings, and I think. Silhouettes have a kind of unique place there because there's something about the nostalgia and the slightly old-fashioned feeling of them, which just fits very nicely with that kind of event. It's not a portrait. It's very quick, but really, what it does also is it kind of reminds people of times gone by. There's a sort of feeling that it sort of harks back to the Victorian or Georgian eras.
On maybe in your website or somewhere, you were saying that silhouettes are not quite as old as people perceive them to be.
They're not. That's true. Yes. Yeah.
Because you're right. Because I'd perceive them to be, Egyptians were doing doing.
Well, they were, but what we call silhouettes, as in literally a shadow portrait, really became prominent in the mid 18th century. So which is as late as that. So long after, it was quite late. If you look at the story of Western art, that's really quite late. It was from about 1750s, 1760s that you started to see professional silhouettists making silhouettes of people in town centres all over the country. And then
Did it come from France, I presume?
No, it doesn't. Oddly, the name comes from France, but not the art. The art is a much more Northern European. So they were much more popular in the UK and in Germany and Sweden and places like that.
Yeah.
And they were originally called shades. They were called shades or shadow portraits was the English name. There was a French artist who called Auguste Edouard who came to England as a refugee from the Napoleonic Wars. And he was the first artist to call himself a silhouettist and to call his work silhouettes. And he did that to make them seem somehow exotic and different than the common or garden shades. Which would be made by English artists all over the country. But he didn't start making silhouettes until he came to England. So I would still, although he was French, I would still insist that his art was English.
It was English.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Everyone's world it's literally a variety of worlds. The woman I'm seeing who was in Cirque du Soleil, who I'm seeing next, it's that world. It's a sort of self-contained world, and you're sort of in it. In your world, it's fascinating because people not in that world have no idea.
They have no idea it exists. I know.
They have no idea, and that's what's fascinating. You see, you go to school and you careers advice, and you have all these worlds which are sort of expected for you to go into. Then you end up in a world which people have no idea.
Quite.
about.
Yeah. No one in art college ever talked about the entertainment business as even a remote possibility. It just wasn't. I mean, I suspect it may be more known about now, just because there are a lot of artists doing sort of event work and caricatures and that kind of thing.
But the same with classical musicians. I mean, again, changed now, but in the old days, you'd want to be in an orchestra or maybe have a very serious classical ensemble and maybe do the odd wedding, but certainly not the sort of. There's classical artists who make a fortune just in the corporate world.
Yeah, of course there are. Yeah.
Great. Well, Charles, this has been an absolute delight.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Now, I hear you hold bi-monthly virtual studio days.
Yes.
How does that work?
That works. This is something that I started during lockdown. Lockdown was a very interesting experience for me, as it was for anyone working in the entertainment business, because all the events stopped pretty much overnight. And suddenly, I spent, 6 months, as we all did, dealing with desperate clients who had to cancel their bookings. It was an awful experience. But having a lot of time on my hands, I sort of thought, well, how can I bring this online? We were all faced with this thing of having to pivot our work online. And for me, it was very simple because, if I can have a video connection with somebody, then of course I can just ask them to turn to profile and I can cut a portrait of them. So I started doing this quite casually for people on Facebook. And then I started using Zoom. And once I discovered Zoom, partly because the quality of the video was so much better than anything I'd seen before, and also because the medium itself is so flexible. So I started scheduling weekly events. And I created a whole website where people could come to the website and book a ticket, book a sitting. So I would set myself up to be cutting silhouettes on Zoom for a number of hours each day. And I divide my day into 10-minute slots, and people could book a time slot to come and have the silhouettes done. And in 10 minutes, I can cut 2 silhouettes. And for me, it was like, the way I described it as digital street art, because for me, it was like going back to Covent Garden. It was going back to a place where essentially I'd set up my stall, albeit a virtual stall, and people could just come and buy a silhouette for not too much money.
And you still do that now?
And I enjoyed it so much because I found myself cutting silhouettes of people in America, people in Australia, and I just thought this is absolutely amazing because I was talking to people in their own homes. I was doing silhouettes of their pets, of their kids, and I just loved it. And these little parcels of time where I would meet people, cut silhouettes of them, and then afterwards put the silhouettes in the post. And I loved it so much that I've carried on doing that.
So if people wanted to do that, where would they go?
They go to my website at silhouettist.com. Just follow the instructions, essentially. Usually I'm doing mostly one event a month, usually on a Sunday, sometimes 2. And people have to find a time that's free and book a slot.
So what I'll do is I'll add that information to the program notes of this program, so if people want to have
they can. And if the secret information is if they enter the discount code scissors, they get a discount.
Oh, there we go, scissors. Scissors. I will remember that, scissors. Charles, this has been a delight. Thank you very, very much for your time, and thank you very much for my silhouette.
My pleasure. It's lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you. Thank you.